Mazenom Maaroufom, our guest today. We're almost same age, you're a little bit younger. You said very interesting thing in one interview, that writers are like bells. When you look at today's world, how important it is writing and reading, and what does it mean that writers are bells?
Well, it means that I think when we write, it's like an organic process that enables us to understand ourselves, to delve into ourselves on a deeper level. I think sometimes living the everyday life, routine and, like obligations, duties, it doesn't allow you to understand yourself, though you are interacting with the world as if it's you, but it's not maybe completely you, it's now part of you, and maybe the part you don't like about yourself is also contributing there. But when you go, sit and write, and you are by yourself, and it makes you, this is the opportunity to explore your, maybe a deeper version of you, like worries, also anxieties, pleasures, thoughts, fantasies, everything. And I think, in this context, when it comes to reading books, reading also provides us the chance to understand ourselves and ourselves in the world. Because when we read a book, it's coming from another author, from a view that we didn't certainly have, that astonishes us or surprises us, and so I think that's why now it's very important to read and write, but mostly, let's say, to read, now in a way that, because we are surrounded by flood of information nowadays, we have not gotten the chance to yet, or we probably will not ever have the chance to process the information that we have. We have plenty of information and we are floating, and we cannot also, the system is made in a way that we cannot really use this information to do any change in the system. We know the truth, we know what's going on, between brackets, at least we think so. Or we know to some level that there is some, the regimes are not acting as before. They are telling you everything, but at the same time telling you things in a way that you're incapable of using this information to achieve justice on some level. That's why, it's very important to feel grounded to life and through reading books.
What you said was very important and beautiful, I think, in a sense, because ordinary people with the life as the life is constructed maybe don't have time or space to go through this kind of process. We are surrounded by fake news, by social media. They tell us that our kids don't read as we used to do. So how to encourage this new generation who are in a way, who understand the moment of history we will live in with climate change, with all the things that are going on, how to encourage thinking in today's world?
I think, we are dealing with a generation that has different level of intelligence than ours, Their intelligence is different than ours. They are very interesting, fun, generation that sometimes or often you see that they really refuse hypocrisy. They go directly to achieve things straightforward, because this is one of the things that we can rely on. We grew up within circumstances, political circumstances, that we were not able to raise our voice when we were kids.
Without internet.
Without internet also, lots of things were hidden from us. We were partly delusional, partly fictionalizing things in a way. But this generation is very smart and very interesting, I think, and they have their own philosophy. And I can't say, just because we are different or we don't really share the same interests that, we are separated. I think we could learn from them in a way that, in the past, older generation used to teach, younger generation used to know from the older generation about the world. I think now it's the opposite. We, the older generation, could simply go to the younger generation to ask them about what is going on, you know. And I think how we encourage that is reading, like when it comes to books, is by engaging them in the process, you know, and also by producing books that would include them, that we should look at this is the new generation that's going to carry maybe heavier stuff, you know, like we have lots of political causes. Africa has been under problems for ages, decades. The cause of Palestine, climate changes, you know, like now the war in Ukraine, like there is lots of, like, there is a burden that is, you know, like, and that's waiting for them, and challenges, you know.
And pandemics where they were closed basically, you know, for 2 years.
Yeah, well, yes, and I think we don't know what's going to happen, you know, like, I mean, the consequences are still, something is going to hit hard, you know. We didn't expect the war in Ukraine, but something related to the pandemic is still going to explode, to float on the surface.
About let's walk a little bit. We had some, you know, really strong identitarian issues, you know. We have from one side, or had radicalization in societies, this or that. You are from the family of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, which, you know, sectarian, identitarian, you know, you have double traumas somewhere in your history. How important is the experience of Middle East in a sense of world today? You know, we had Syrian war for 10 years plus. No one talks about Syria. Assad is still there. Lebanon had, you know, 3 Syrian refugees to 1 Lebanese citizen. So what do you think about your personal experience in that regard and experience of the region, who is still, you know, as it was, as we knew it?
I think it's very sad when it comes to the Middle East. First of all, the Middle East constitutes lots of cultures, local cultures, and cultures that depend on the geography of where they are, you know. Also depends on the history of these regions, what kind of civilizations they interacted with, you know, what kind of political changes they were subjected to or went through. And at the same time, like when we look over the past maybe 500 years, we see that the Middle East never had the chance to be really standing on their own. We had the Ottoman occupation for decades, for centuries. Then we had the First World War. You know, we were handed to classical colonial power like France and Britain. And these have experience. They were colonizing in Africa, and so they came with an experience of how to colonize people and how to, you know, rule and subjugate people. And then we were handed after the Second World War to like majority of dictatorships. You know, like in the Middle East, you know, that it was a military power that took over. And this military power managed to establish very good relation with the West at that time. You know, of course, the Cold War played a role to, you know, like to keep these, like America wanted to keep them in its axis, and the Soviets also. So we were never really like given the chance to be independent and to be, you know, like outside this radicalization. You know, it was unfortunately we had to face this, and we are still. It's like I cannot really, when it comes to Middle East, of course we can easily talk about dictators, but we also, to be fair, we have to talk about who brought these dictators in power and how could they stay in power for 40 years, for so long, you know. And these, like, and why should a dictator die in a way that without going to be sentenced or, you know, like televised, you know, like court, let's say, you know, like.
It's an experience for, that's why I'm asking, because we now have the situation with Putin.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know if we have, you know, like it seems that we still practicing the same political activities in a way, you know, or doomed to face same destinies over and over again. This is maybe when it comes to like probably my view is like, you know, because the Cold War started before the end of the Second World War. During the negotiations to end the Second World War, the Cold War was erupting. And then we lived under the Cold War pretext until the 90s, and now we are still in the same mentalities, you know, like Fukuyama talked about the end of history, but okay, it really didn't happen in a way, you know. Suddenly there is a new enemy, Islamism, and still the same practices. So like I think what we need to do is like to stress on our culture, to reveal that we are not really the stereotype others, media or try to nail us in.
You've moved to Reykjavik, and I remember when I was in Reykjavik, I never felt this Nordic component. It was more like, you know, Brazilian bossa nova feeling, relaxed very, and it's an island, so it has something to do. It doesn't matter where its geography is. When you look at the Mediterranean and what it brought to the world, and this Nordic spirit or Northern Sea, how do you relate to that?
Maybe I don't, you know, in a way, like, you know, Reykjavik was the last place I've ever imagined myself to end up, you know, like, I mean, of course we have this classical relation with the Central European countries that we like to be in Central Europe. Now, by some chance, I ended up in Reykjavik, and I found out that it's very interesting city. It's actually, as you say, it's quite correct, like that it's not Nordic and it's not European. It is Icelandic in its way, you know. People are very relaxed, you know.
Ireland and Iceland.
Yes, and also, you know, the thing is, like, when it comes to people of islands, usually they have strong sense of belonging to the land, strong sense, you know, but Icelanders, generally, they don't have this in a way. They are more bound to creativity, you know, they are very enthusiastic, acquainted with the world, you know. That's open, and that's why it makes it, you know, very interesting to live in a small place like Reykjavik, but culturally very boiling, you know, as like volcanoes, you know. And they have, like, I mean, 10% they say of the population is writers, you know, like, or published books, which counts to 34,000 writers, you know, which is more than the Middle East writers, probably.
And for the end, I read some of your poems. I'm sorry I cannot quote one, but poetry today. It seems like there's no poetry today in our lives. You mentioned kids and education, and as important thing, I spoke with my son, basically like the school doesn't teach them in a right way to correspond to poetry, to put it in the context of today. So how important it is poetry, and I would really like you to maybe, while you answer the question, think of the lyrics that you would like to share with us, which you think are corresponding with our today's world the best.
Well, you know, I wrote poetry for some time, then I stopped writing poetry because, you know, my bag was stolen in Stockholm, but, you know, so I got this poetry block at some point. But I think, you know, what's important is that, like, nowadays I read poetry, of course, and I read modern contemporary poetry, and it's very interesting how it shapes itself into the lyrics of everyday life. So it's like, it has been like, these poets have been challenging issues of racism, color, identity, you know, like segregation, women rights, independence, gender equality, LGBT, you know, issues. And I think it's like poetry has taken in new destinies because of this new generation engaged in poetry, which makes it very interesting for us because they are taking this stand. You know, we have another stance to take, or I'm talking about myself. But what makes it also like interesting that life always produces, you know, new forms of creativity, new styles, new ways of thinking, and which is the most important here.
Mazenom Maarouf, thank you so much for this interview. Can you maybe tell us what you're working on right now for the end?
Yes. I have a book of short stories that's coming out next month in Arabic. It's going to be published in Beirut. And I'm working currently, hopefully, or I think so, on a novel. Yeah, and it's based on my childhood experience in Beirut during the war years. So it's like quite intense and full of characters. And
You were 5?
When the war erupted, I was like, no, I was, the first war I remember, I was 3 or 4, yeah, like in shelters, and and there is a strong memory, strong recollection of that. And I think the realization is that this trauma continues with you, and you have to accept that, okay, you lived the war under very young age, you're traumatized, now what do you do with this trauma? Do you let this trauma eat you up, or do you make something out of it? And this is how probably I work, to overcome these traumas. But I sound now dramatic, but it's not like that, because I really don't like to put war in the context of the mechanical sense of sounds and bombings and killings. War is a social condition, and I think we live now similar conditions when it comes to poverty, so inequality, whether you're under war or not. Of course, if you're under war, it's horrible. I mean, we are all shocked by what's going on in Ukraine now, and in Syria, what happened in Palestine, in Iraq, and the blast of Beirut. It's like we are surrounded by the voice of war, in a way, or sound of war, in a way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.